Welcome back to Enigma of the Unknown. Today, we're diving into some chilling and mysterious tales about Christmas. These aren't cozy holiday stories. They're real experiences filled with strange encounters and haunting mysteries. Beneath the glow of Christmas lights, there might be secrets lurking in the shadows. So, prepare yourself to explore a world where the holiday spirit meets something far more unsettling. Story number 1. Lock your doors on the night before Christmas. Please, make sure you lock everybody in their rooms on the night before Christmas. It is very important for everybody's health. The name Santa Claus came from Saint Nicholas. In Dutch, that would be Sint Nicolaas, and that's where Santa Claus got his name. I can personally attest to the fact that this is false. My father was paranoid, very paranoid. He was also a little crazy, maybe more than just a little. We lived in a neighborhood surrounded by trees in the mountains. Growing up, our house had cameras facing every single angle of our property. Not just regular cameras either, night vision and infrared. The night vision just made everything look gray. But the infrared was blue and any heat signatures gave off an orange glow. I know this because he had given me access to the cameras and I frequently viewed them from my computer. Over the years, I have seen some weird things on these cameras, but that's a story for another time. The weirdest thing growing up was Christmas. The holiday itself wasn't weird. We got a Christmas tree, had presents, all the normal things. The weird part was the night before. My dad loves his cameras. We had them on 24/7, 364 days per year. You must be confused. There's 365 days in a year. You're correct. Every year on the night before Christmas, my dad would turn off every single camera. Weird thing is, this wasn't just my dad. The other houses in the neighborhood didn't have cameras or anything fancy. But some of my friends told me that they weren't allowed to leave their room either on that night. Anyway, on the night before Christmas, after we laid out the cookies and milk, my dad would make me go to bed early. There was a lock on the outside of my door. My dad was never abusive towards me, but on the night before Christmas, he would always lock me in my room. Despite being paranoid and crazy, my dad was the nicest man I've ever known. The only time he ever scared me was how serious he got on the night before Christmas. Delon, do not leave this fucking room. Ya understand me? I let you run around the neighborhood with your little friends doing whatever the hell y'all damn well please every single day. I let you stay on that computer for hours searching up God knows what, probably choking your chicken the entire day. The one thing I ask of ya is do not leave your room on this night. Capice? My dad had shown me hundreds of missing persons reports. Every time I questioned this little tradition of his, he would have 20 ready to show. All of these missing people had been missing on a December 26th, day after Christmas, spanning back years. Each of these reports had a circumstance of disappearance section that explained what the person had done shortly before their disappearance. And none of it seemed to have anything to do with Christmas. Each one was completely random. But he said that they purposely changed it so that nobody ever finds out what really happened. He would never tell me what really happened. Just another one of his conspiracy theories. Yeah, Dad, I know. You tell me the same thing every year. I know, 14-year-old me replied with attitude. All right then, I don't want you to be another statistic dash. You mean statistic? I smirked. Yes, boy. I don't want you to become STHTISTIC. You saw all those missing person reports I showed ya. All those people gone missing on December 26th. Day after Christmas. Every year. That ain't gon' be my boy. He said as he walked out of my room. He was so paranoid. Did he think Santa was going to kidnap me? Santa isn't even real. After he walked out of my room, I heard a click as he set the lock outside my door. I heard his footsteps protrude away as I turned over to my computer that displayed our camera footage. I counted down. 3, 2, 1, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, and boom. Just like that, the camera footage shut off and displayed no feed connected. I felt like a psychic for being able to accurately predict the exact time it would shut off. "Good night, boy," my dad shouted across the hall from his room. "Good night," I shouted back. I hated this tradition. I loved going downstairs to eat junk food in the middle of the night, and I loved checking the camera to get a glance at the weird things I saw in the woods from time to time. But on this night every year, I couldn't go downstairs to eat junk food, and I couldn't bring it upstairs either. No food was allowed in my room. And all that just because of my dad's paranoia. Every year until this day, I just listened to my dad. After he shut off the camera footage and locked me in my room, I would usually just accept it and go to sleep. For some reason, I just couldn't sleep. So despite my dad's wishes, I stayed up playing computer games. Around 2 a.m., I heard something on our roof. There were a lot of animals and other things in those woods, so this was a pretty common occurrence. But the sound I heard this time just sounded different. It sounded like something landed. Oh, Killer Santa must be here. I joked to myself as I continued playing my computer game. Shortly after the thud on the rooftop, I started hearing heavy footsteps followed up by our floorboards creaking downstairs. Goosebumps formed on my body and my breathing got a bit more frantic as I worked up a sweat. What the fuck is that? I thought to myself. Then, I got a thought that would prove to be the worst decision I've ever made in my life. I got onto the application that controls the cameras. I looked over the button that would reactivate the cameras and hovered my cursor over it. What if it's an intruder? I tried convincing myself. I took a deep breath that was followed by a loud gulp. Then I clicked activate. The night vision cameras switched on. There were almost 50 boxes on my screen, each one blinking on separately. After a few seconds, they were all on. I had my eyes peeled looking at each box, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. That's until I saw the living room camera, standing in front of our dining room table. Next to the Christmas tree was a big, overweight man in a Santa suit. He had a long beard and glasses. It was the textbook definition of what Santa looked like. My eyes were wide and filled with astonishment as an equal mix of excitement and fear filled my brain. It was exciting, but it's just weird. And it's even more weird that I can't go downstairs. What would Santa do to me if I did? As I was staring at the screen, staring at Santa eating cookies, I noticed that his hand froze right in front of his mouth. I saw him slowly lower the cookie back onto the plate. He turned around and looked directly into the camera. He slowly brought his hand up in front of him and wagged his finger side to side. He knew I was watching him. When he did this, I slammed my hands onto the desk to boost me up so I can dive into my bed and pretend to be asleep. I accidentally made contact with my keyboard, causing the camera to switch from night vision to infrared. What I saw on the camera wasn't Santa anymore. It was a big, fat creature with no clothes on. Its mouth was wide open and it looked like it had a broken and detached jaw. It had large oval eyes that had nothing in them. It had rows of large, razor-sharp teeth in its mouth. The creature was tall and its arms were long and deformed. At the edge of its arms were hands with sharp claws that replaced its fingers. "Daddy," I screamed. Instantly after, I heard footsteps shuffling to my room. "What did you do, boy? Why are you still awake?" He yelled as he unlocked the door and ran into my room. He looked at my computer and saw the camera footage on. I was on my bed crying. Suddenly, I could hear a heavy thud on our staircase. "Oh, you stupid son of a bitch. You stupid little boy. What have you done?" he said as my crying became hysteric. He sat down next to me, hugged me so tightly as if it's the last time I'll ever feel his hug. And he whispered, "I love you, boy. Don't be scared. Ain't nothing gonna happen to ya," he said as we heard another thud coming from our staircase. The footsteps were so heavy that there was dust coming down from my ceiling. Thud. "I don't know if you's gonna see me again, boy, but I want you to always remember what I taught you." Thud. "Why wouldn't I see you again, Dad? What's going to happen?" Thud. "We can't both escape. It wouldn't let us, boy." Thud. "Dad, I love you. I don't want you to leave." I sobbed back. Thud. My dad got up and opened the window. We were on the second floor. He picked me up. Thud. Kissed me on the cheek as a tear ran down his. Thud. He threw me out of the second-story window. I landed in some bushes below our house. I don't know if I was injured or not. I had too much adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Run, boy!" he screamed as the thuds got faster. I took off running through the woods when I heard the most disturbing, blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my entire life. I just kept running until I couldn't hear the screams anymore. That was many years ago. I had kept running until I tired myself out, fell asleep under a tree. I returned to the house the following morning of the 26th. There was no sign of any struggle, no blood, nothing. My dad was just gone. I checked the cameras. The footage was gone. Looking through the recordings, it was just blank for the entire night. Now I'm a father and I have my own kids. I have kept my dad's tradition alive every night before Christmas. I don't know if that thing was isolated to my neighborhood or if that's what Santa is for everybody. All I know is I'm not going to risk finding out. So with all of that said, please lock all of your doors on the night before Christmas. The next time you're awake during that night and you hear noises in your house, I suggest you stay in bed and keep your eyes closed. Don't get up. Don't investigate. Don't be a curious little fucker like I was. The last thing I'll leave you with is, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He knows when you are sleeping, and he knows when you're awake. But he doesn't care if you've been bad or good. So don't go looking for him, for your own sake. Story number 2. Our Christmas tree is up. I know it's still too early. Hell, technically it's not even Thanksgiving Day yet. I hate rushing the season, so usually I don't even like the idea of it being up before the first day of December. But this year we didn't really have a choice. Most people these days have artificial trees, but my family has always bought real trees every year. It's a pain to clean up the needles, but you just can't beat that nostalgic Christmas pine scent. And it's cool how there's no such thing as the perfect tree. Each one is unique and different in its own way. But the one we brought home last year was a little more unique than most. When my dad brought it inside, nothing really seemed weird about it at all. It was just your average live balsam fir tree, green needles, 6.5 feet, trunk sawed off and ready to be put on display. No, it wasn't until a little later that things started getting freaky. One of the secret tips of putting up a natural Christmas tree is to let it sit for a few days before you decorate it. You gotta give it some time for the branches to spread out. My dad would always say. So it wasn't until 4 days after we put our new tree in its stand that we gathered around as a family to add the decorations. That's when we noticed the growths. On every other branch hung these small lumps, for lack of a better word. They were brown and dry, and none of them really had any defining features, but were all unique shapes. I looked at my dad, our household Christmas tree expert, but he looked just as creeped out as I was. It was pretty freaky, but we went ahead and strung up our decorations anyway. I shuddered every time my hand accidentally brushed one. Over time, the growth started changing shape. We all had our own ideas of what they were. My mom thought maybe they were an odd kind of fruit. My dad thought they were deformities in the wood of the branches. And I thought maybe some parasitic insect had infested the tree, which meant none of us were prepared when we noticed that the largest growth was starting to look exactly like a tiny rib bone. It's funny how, when faced with something terrible, we can pick and choose what we want to see. Sounds crazy to say now, but even though our Christmas tree was growing weird bone-like protrusions, we all just sort of chose not to talk about it. For the whole month, we pretended that everything was fine, and that our tree wasn't sprouting random bones. Maybe we thought that if we didn't bring attention to it, they'd go away and we'd be left with a normal tree. We couldn't ignore it forever though. Each growth started to grow into some kind of macabre skeleton part, and by Christmas Day, none of us wanted to go anywhere near it. I could never bring myself to really look at it, but every now and then I would catch glimpses of it in my peripheral vision. Part of a skull here, a vertebrae there. They were distinctly bone-shaped, but none were human. From my quick glances, I easily noticed bird beaks and possum skulls. What looked like human finger bones at first glance could have been the spine of a rat or mouse. The breaking point was when some of the growths started to fuse together. The fusions were no longer shaped like animal bones, but they weren't quite human either. They had a warped, alien quality to them. The growths were evolving. It was past time to get the tree out of our home. On Christmas Day, we gathered around the horrifying tree and fully looked at it for the first time. It was a mess of bones, tree branches, and our pitiful attempt at decorations. With a decisive breath, my mom bent to the floor to take it out of the tree stand. She yelped and jumped back like she had been burned. "Oh God, Eric, it's the floor," she stammered, frozen in shock. My dad quickly stooped down to take a look. "Oh, shit," he said, his eyes locked to the base of the trunk. I thought he'd freeze there like Mom did, but he got to his feet and ran to the garage. I couldn't stand it anymore. I crouched to the floor to take a look. I'll make it short. The tree had grown into the floor. The wood had engulfed the plastic tree stand and rooted itself straight into the floor of our house. There weren't any roots, just floor and tree trunk, fused together as if they always had been. I was too shocked to move. My dad ran back into the room with an axe from the garage. I just barely got myself up and pulled Mom away in time before he started swinging. When the first blow connected with the base of the trunk, an agonizing wail filled the air. I felt it more than heard it, the vibrations overpowering me, almost making it seem like it was coming from within me. I covered my ears and collapsed to my knees in time to see a warped growth from the middle of the tree. Spine, femur, pelvis, lash out and smack my dad across the room. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the tree shivering in pain or reverence. I'm still not sure, as the sound of the rattling bones filled the air. So, our tree is already up this year, since we were never able to take it down from last Christmas. For a whole year, it's been in our living room, and we've just had to pretend it isn't. We make up lies and excuses so no guests will come over. My mom and I have become masters of DIY home improvement, so we haven't had to call any repairman. My dad hasn't even been anywhere near that side of the house since he got out of the hospital. The tree's still attached to the floor, but I feel like it's rooted deeper than that. I feel like the roots go past the floor, down through the foundation of the house and deep into the soil beneath. In the beginning, it rooted in the top layer among dead rats, possums, and birds. But since then, the roots have gone much deeper. So deep that the newer evolved growths are from something old, something ancient, something from far before our time. It's connected to something we're not supposed to see, and it's awakening in our house. It's been pretty quiet for the last few months, but with the holidays rolling back around, it started to act up again, which is why I'm posting this, to maybe get some help before it's too late. So far, it's just been bones. But this morning, I saw an eyeball. Story number 3. I steal packages off of porches on Christmas Eve, but I am about to pay the price. I still remember my first score as a porch pirate. Wasn't even a criminal at the time. Oddly enough, my neighbor, Josh Flanagan, had borrowed my push mower and didn't bring it back for a few weeks. The grass in my yard was getting high and city code enforcement had left a few sweet notes taped to my front door telling me if I didn't get it mowed, they'd start fining me. In frustration, I headed over to Josh's house next door to retrieve the mower. As I walked up his cracked cement driveway, I was confused when I realized his grass was nearly as tall as mine. A few patches in the backyard were shorter than the rest, but it didn't look like he had put my mower to much use. I banged on the door. My ears felt hot with frustration at having loaned him the damn mower for it to just sit and use at his house. Yeah, I could hear him shout through the door before he had even opened it. The sliding of chains and the sliding of locks sounded from the other side. If it's a damn salesman, you can go on and... Oh, hey, Mikey, how's it going? Not so good, I said flatly. City left me a code violation notice on the door yesterday. Said the grass is too high. Gonna need to get the mower back before they send me a bill. Josh smiled and tucked his hands behind his head, interlacing his fingers. His eyes drifted down toward the ground, alternating, His feet lifted from the ground and hammered the toe of his tennis shoe against the ground like a fidgeting toddler. "Sorry, Mikey," he said. I still aimed at the floor. "Been meaning to talk to you about that. The mower is busted. Kinda hit the blade on a rock and I think the crankshaft is broken. Been meaning to get a replacement for you, but money's been tight." "You broke my damn mower?" I spat. "Were you gonna tell me?" He shrugged his shoulders and continued fidgeting childishly in his doorway. Over his shoulder, I could see walls and shelves full of Star Wars memorabilia. Having never been in his house before, I didn't know he was a collector. The guy didn't own a lawnmower, but the value of his toy collection was staggering. "Look," I said angrily. "I bought it at a yard sale for $100. Give me 50 and we will call it even." "No can do, Mikey," he said, finally making eye contact with me again. "It's like I said, money's been tight. Soon as I got a little extra cash, I'll hit you back." He never repaid me. Wasn't much of a surprise. Josh and I weren't big buddies or anything. Having a pissed-off neighbor wasn't a problem for him. He ducked me at every opportunity. Whenever I would knock on the door to try and recover a paltry amount of cash for the mower, he just wouldn't answer. The only time I saw the lousy bastard was when a UPS driver would drop a package on his porch. Probably some damn toy he bought online with the money he said he didn't have. I tell myself, it'd serve him right if you took his next package and sold it. Get your money back. That thought festered in my head for a few weeks. Those packages would sit on his porch for hours, just leaning up against the red brick wall of that asshole's house. My eyes would scan the neighborhood for signs of onlookers, but it was always quiet in the middle of the day. No one would see me, and no one did when I finally went through with it. Snatching that first package was a blur. I don't really remember the details. I know I'd watched Josh pull out of the driveway in his rusty coupe about 5 minutes before the UPS driver leaned the brown box against his door. The next thing I knew, I was sitting at my kitchen table. Brown paper and bubble wrap sat crumpled around an open box. Inside sat a small figure on a rectangle of cardboard. A vintage, unopened Boba Fett action figure from the Empire Strikes Back lineup made in 1979. The card back was slightly creased with a few scratches, but to a collector, the thing was worth its weight in gold. At least that's what the comic shop owner said a few towns said. Sold it to him for $2,000. I now know he sold it for double that amount, but there's not much you can do when dealing with a fence. I hate dealing with fences, but not much I can do about it. A fence, for those of you who aren't criminally inclined, is someone who buys stolen things knowing damn good and well they are stolen. You are not going to get the total value of the goods since the fence is looking to make a decent profit. But it's the safest way to make a buck when you're dealing in hot goods. Pawn shops ask too many damn questions. They are the first places that the cops go when something valuable is stolen. You can find a pawn shop or two now and again that does some shady dealings. But most of them are on the up and up. Keep their books clean. Good records of purchases and sales. They may put a hell of a markup on your used junk, but that's as dirty as most of them get. eBay is a risky bet, too. I'm not sure how closely cops keep an eye on it, but it sure would be weird if one account just happened to be selling all the random assorted items stolen from porches around town. A quick warrant to the site and your fun and games are over, so you're stuck selling to fences. A combination of the adrenaline rush from grabbing the packages mixed with the easy money, and I was hooked. None of my day jobs had ever paid nearly that well. You had good weeks and bad weeks, but given enough time and enough unwatched packages, you would always make enough money for your bills. The best time of year to pick up packages was always around Christmas. Christmas Eve. As a matter of fact, all the last-minute shoppers ordering their Amazon shipments end up creating a bottleneck for parcel delivery services. You can hardly walk a city block without seeing those brown boxes with smiley tape leaning against the doors. There is a trick to finding which houses to snag the packages from. First, you snatch during daylight. Someone is going to spot you. Second, no apartment buildings or complexes. Same issue. You'll never make it out without someone spotting you. Last, do the best you can to find a house without one of those damn video doorbells. To blend in, I always wear slacks, tennis shoes, a button-up, and a winter vest, all brown. Makes you look like a UPS delivery man. No one gives you a second look in that getup. How many times have you given a UPS driver a double take? Last but not least, I rent a Penske truck from about 3 cities away. If you're going to spend all night snatching packages, you need something to haul them in. A mid-sized sedan won't cut it. Those box trucks paired with the UPS lookalike outfit help me all but fade into the background of the evening. As soon as the sun goes down, I get to work. The system has run flawlessly for years, until earlier tonight. Just after sunset, I jumped into the pink truck and started making my rounds. It had been a decent night, about 3 dozen packages. My mind was swimming with the possibilities of what waited inside as I continued down the lonely streets. It was nearly 10 at night when I decided to wrap things up. Staying out any later than that made it difficult to maintain the illusion you were a delivery man. Video doorbells were at an all-time high as well, which had caused a significant drop in easy-to-hit houses. I was walking back to the truck with what would be the last packages of the night when I heard something moving behind me. My body froze in place as I waited for someone to open the front door and calm me down. Slowly, I turned my head over my scheduler and gazed back toward the door. Nothing. The house was pitch black. Doors and windows closed up tightly. I turned and began to head back toward the truck, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me in the inky darkness. When I reached the back of the box truck, I raised the rear gate just enough to slide one package in and rolled it back down as quietly as possible. I slipped a smaller package into my pocket and I worked to secure the door. The lock has just engaged when I heard someone call from the darkness. "What have you got there?" A booming voice called. Panicked, I spun around and scanned the dark row of houses but couldn't find the source of the voice. Up here, my eyes drifted up and made contact with a dark silhouette. His broad, stocky frame lorded over the roof of the house where I had just stolen the package. There was no second-story window to have crawled out. Panic gave way to confusion. "Good evening," I exclaimed the silhouette. "Just out dropping off some last-minute packages. Took this one to the wrong door earlier, so I had to come back and get it. Merry Christmas." I began to walk toward the door of the truck when the sound of multiple footsteps on the roof drew my attention again. "You must have dropped off a lot of packages at the wrong door." "Young man," said the voice from atop the house, "I've seen you picking up a lot of boxes, but you haven't left any behind. It seems like we're on the same route tonight." An angry, nervous lump bulged in my throat. Knowing someone had watched me throughout the course of the night filled me with equal parts dread and rage. I had managed not to get caught all of these years, and the sudden notion that someone had been keeping tabs on me throughout the evening made me feel like an amateur. "Look here, buddy," I said, turning back toward the voice. "Mind your own damn business. If you're creeping around behind me and haven't called the cops, you can't be up to anything too great yourself." The dark silhouette on the roof began to bellow in laughter. Butterflies erupted in my guts at the sound. I don't know if it was the unsettling tone or if I were scared he would wake up the residents of the house, but dread filled my body. "One of us is leaving presents and one of us is taking them away," the voice said. "For shame, Michael. Put them back or I'll have to add you to my naughty list." "Naughty list?" I questioned as I began to crawl into the cab of the truck. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Sam." The name died on my lips. "Michael," the voice said. "Put the packages back or one of my helpers will have to stay behind and inspire you to do the right thing." "Piss off," I shouted as I settled into the seat. "You're gonna get the cops called on both of us. You weird piece of..." Before I could finish, something fell from the roof and into the bushes in front of the house. As my eyes tried to focus on the thing in the foliage, a massive object lifted away from the dark roof and drifted into the night sky. I rubbed my eyes, having a hard time coming to terms with what I had seen. Confused, I cranked the key in the ignition and the heavy engine rumbled to life, shifting the truck into drive. I was preparing to pull away when something clambered out of the bush in front of the house. Panic thundered in my heart when it made eye contact with me. 20 feet away and standing just outside the bushes was a squat, stocky thing wearing a crimson robe. Couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, but it still looked massive, dangerous. Silver bells dangled from the end of the pointy hood, and the green felt shoes on the thick, white feet, pale hands, wide and veined, protruded from the robe sleeves. A set of burning red eyes pierced out from the darkness of the hood. A leather belt with archaic carpentry tools nearly drooped to the ground around the thing's bulky frame. Before I could slam my foot onto the gas, it bolted toward the truck. I hammered the pedal, but it was too late. It slammed into the passenger side door like a wrecking ball. The tires on the right side of the truck left the ground as the glass exploded into a rain of shrapnel. Squealing, crunching metal broke the silence of the night. The tires hit the ground, rebounded, and the box truck bounced in place for a moment, shocked and bleeding from the peppering of broken glass. I looked through the missing window in a daze, trying to spot the creature, but it was nowhere to be seen. Silence had returned to the night for just a moment. Just a moment. In the distance, I could hear the low swell of sirens. My mind was starting to come back into focus when the truck began to rock again. Shooting a glance back to the broken window, I saw a set of beefy white fingers grip the top of the door, lifting the red-robed head to peer over the opening. As the two glowing eyes made contact with mine, I screamed and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. A look of malice pierced me, and the elf thing reached out with one hefty arm toward me. Just ahead, I saw a gnarled oak growing just beside the sidewalk on my right. The creature had nearly pulled itself into the cab of the truck when I jerked the wheel, sending the right side of the truck onto the sidewalk and raking the side against the colossal tree. "Give me the creature rumbled in a heavy, hoarse voice. Before it, the trunk of the tree hammered into its side. The pale hands loosened from the doorframe, and it wailed as it tumbled to the concrete below. I felt something large go beneath the rear tire, hopefully the creature. The side mirror had been torn off as I grazed the tree, so there was no way to know for certain. Feeling slight relief, I looked down to see that I was driving nearly 60 miles per hour in a residential neighborhood. The sound of sirens was growing closer by the moment, and I knew that the overwhelming roar of the truck's engine paired with the damage on the right side would draw the cops' attention quickly. I slowed the truck down to match the speed limit and crawled slowly through the neighborhood, praying silently that the police would take no notice of me. I was nearly out of the neighborhood when I saw the lights of the patrol cars. They danced between the houses from the next block to my left. I missed them by one city block as they headed toward the emergency call. My pulse was finally starting to lower, and I thought things were going to be okay for just a moment. That was before the truck fishtailed and tilted onto its left side. My door and window hammered against the ground, sending shards of glass and sparks spraying into the cab. The seatbelt cut into my neck, and my body weight pulled me toward the broken window. After what felt like an eternity, the truck screeched to a halt. Slamming and the tearing of metal filled the cab, and I scrambled to unfasten my safety belt. When it unclipped, I fell hard against the concrete and broken glass, burying the shards deep into my shoulder. Pushing myself up, I kicked the ruined windshield out of place and pushed myself through the opening. I ran as hard as I could, lungs burning and muscles aching. As my feet hammered against the concrete, I imagined the robed nightmare rumbling behind me, growing closer, closing the gap, reaching out for me. My anxiety overwhelmed me, causing me to turn my head over my shoulder to see how close the creature was. Heart thundering, I scanned the area behind me. My legs slowed, finally stopping and allowing me to turn. Far behind me at the overturned truck, the robed creature pulled the package from the ruined cargo area. It gently placed the packages into a pile, paying me no mind. I turned and began running again. While the creature may have lost interest in me, the cops would have a few questions once they connected the truck to me. There wasn't much time to try and find a place to lay low. First, I needed a bit of sleep. Took me nearly 2 hours on foot, but I finally made it back to my house. The clicking of the locks and latches of the door filled me with comfort. I knew there would be police interviews in the coming days, probably charges and some jail time. It would be a small price to pay for having made it away from that damn thing. I sat in my recliner facing the open window. Streetlights flooded the lifeless pavement outside. My eyes were getting heavy, and I snickered to myself thinking of that mutant creature waddling through the dark, putting the stolen packages back on people's porches. That's all the damn thing had wanted. The packages. It had nearly killed me getting them back. But once it had them, it was over. I smiled a weary smile and tilted my head back onto the top of the chair. My eyes closed and I slid my hands into the vest pockets as I began to drift off to sleep. I was almost under when I felt the crinkling of a wrapper in my right pocket. Pulling the object out, I opened my eyes and looked down. A small shipping package from the last house. I had forgotten that I shoved it in my pocket. It had been so small. It had slipped my mind. It had wanted the packages. All of them, while rising in my throat. I looked into the streetlight-flooded road. 2 red orbs peered back at me through the blinds. Story number 4. Every Christmas Eve, we throw a holiday party. No one is allowed to leave for 48 hours. 1 hour till midnight, John shouted as he ran through the living room. I glanced towards the small closet in the hallway. The door had been removed and propped up against the opposite wall, as usual, and the mistletoe had been hung up in the center of the doorway. The closet was empty, and there was no light coming from inside. I held on to my glass of water, nervous. I never drank at the annual holiday party. The things we were about to see were bad enough sober, and I couldn't even imagine what it would be like if I were drunk. I looked over at Mel, who was smoking a joint, as she did every year. I'm not sure how she managed to get through the events of the night, but maybe being high helped her to process what she saw. John ran back through the living room, stopping to make sure all of the windows were locked and all of the curtains were shut. He walked over to the front door, rattling the doorknob and pulling on the door to make sure that it too was locked. Before making his way into the kitchen, the rest of us, Ben, Alma, Mel, and I sat around the living room in silence. Even though we had done this every year for the last 3 years, it wasn't something you could easily get used to. The horrors that we would witness tonight wouldn't be anything like the horrors from last year or the year before. We took over this ritual from our parents, who had passed it on to us when we turned 18. Ever since then, we have made sure that every year, on Christmas Eve, we gather at John's house to make sure that we keep all of the holiday horrors away from the rest of you. The drugs and the food are only here to distract us, although it hardly ever works. We all gather on the day before Christmas Eve, a few minutes before midnight, and we stay inside John's house until midnight on Christmas night. It doesn't always start at the same time, but never before 1 p.m. on Christmas Eve. So we always make sure that we are inside the house and that all the exits are locked tight before the fun starts. I use the word fun very loosely here. I set my glass of water down as Mel passed by me, letting us know she was going to pee before it all started. She came back fairly quickly and plopped back down on the couch, sighing. Mel was always annoyed that we had to do this. She didn't seem as affected by it as the rest of us, and would usually spend most of the month of December complaining about the holiday party. John, Ben shouted suddenly. It's starting. I looked back at the closet. Ben was right. It was starting. And standing in the threshold under the mistletoe was a creature whose top half was a reindeer, with the bottom half of a nude human male. It stood there, looking towards us. Its head had a big hole where its left eye should have been, as if it had been shot there, and there was dried blood all over its face. Its left antler was broken in half, and I could see some bugs crawling around the wound in its face. What the fuck is that? Alma whispered. No one replied. We just stood there, watching it as it watched us. It retreated back into the closet before it got down on all fours and charged towards us. I still flinched even though I knew it couldn't make it more than a few feet away from the closet. I remember asking my parents once why we had to make sure all the exits were locked. even though most of the monsters couldn't get more than a few feet away from the mistletoe. They didn't give me a direct answer, only that making sure that everything was locked guaranteed that nothing would get out. Jesus fucking Christ, Mel shouted. I continued to charge towards us, ramming into the invisible berries each time. Then, just as it had randomly appeared, the creature randomly disappeared, and there was a few minutes of empty silence. No one said a word, but we all watched as the next creature appeared. This one was human, but there was something wrong with him. As usual, the man had been flattened out to resemble the shape of a gingerbread man. He had large, rotting gumdrops that were meant to be gingerbread buttons sewed down his front. His mouth had been pulled back at the corners with some sort of metal hoops that pierced through his skin in order to give him a permanent smile. He waddled from side to side as he attempted to balance on his flattened feet. As he tried to walk out of the closet, his arms got stuck in the doorway and he ran into it over and over, slamming himself into it harder and harder each time until there was a sickening crunching noise and his arms flopped backwards. He finally waddled through the doorway, and this time, he made it out further than the first creature had, and began waddling towards us. "Fuck this," Ben said, leaping behind the couch to take cover. I took a few steps back as the man continued to waddle towards the living room. Suddenly, a branch pierced through his chest from the back, and he was violently pulled back into the closet where he disappeared. That was immediately followed by dozens of branches that snaked their way around the floor of the house, climbing up the walls as they made their way around the house. The branches were covered in the sharpest pine needles I had ever seen, with a few random, broken ornaments hanging off of them. I jumped up onto a couch as the branches made their way into the living room, and everyone else followed my lead as we watched the branches weave in and out of the floorboards. Suddenly, Alma screamed and I turned towards her. Some of the branches had wrapped around the legs of the chair she was on, and she was being pulled towards the closet. John attempted to reach out for her as she was dragged past him, but the branches began to snake up and intertwine until they created a sort of protective dome around the chair, trapping Alma inside. She continued to yell as I tried to figure out a way to get to her without the branches getting to me, but it seemed impossible. It was like the branches had a mind of their own and were making sure that none of us could help Alma. We watched as she was dragged into the closet along with the chairs, before the branches finally retreated. What was that? "They've never taken any of us before," Ben said. No one replied as we continued to watch the closet. Suddenly, Alma leaped out and ran out, but was stopped a few feet away from the doorway. "What?" she shouted, panicked. "Let me out." John leapt off the coffee table and ran over, grabbing hold of Alma's hand and attempting to pull her away from the doorway. But he couldn't. "Don't leave me here. Please, help me," Alma sobbed. Ben ran over and tried to help John, but something was holding Alma back and stopping them from pulling her away. "Ow!" Alma shouted suddenly. I ran over as Mel followed. "What happened?" I asked. "I don't know. Did we pull too hard?" John asked Alma. "Ow!" Alma shouted again, louder this time. "Alma, what's wrong?" I asked. "It hurts," she shouted as she fell to her knees. We watched as she continued to shout in pain, and then we realized what was happening. Her skin was being peeled off in one large chunk. Her biceps had been exposed as the skin continued to peel from the back to the front, until everything, including her face, came off. Alma continued to scream the whole time, even after her skin was off. Her skin began crawling towards us as she screamed and cried in the background. And it started to make sense why John's parents had told him to find a remote area to host the parties at. We began to back away as her skin continued to crawl towards us. I soon realized that it was heading towards John specifically, and he backed into a wall as it continued to snake towards him, climbing up his body. It was at this point that I realized that Alma had stopped screaming, and I turned just in time to see her limp body being dragged back into the closet. It looked like she was dead. I started to get anxious then. None of the things we witnessed had ever affected us this much. Usually some of us would walk away with some scratches, but nothing this permanent. I took a deep breath as I tried to ignore the voice in the brain that was screaming at me to get out of the house as soon as possible. But I knew that I couldn't. I couldn't let all of these things out into the world. I turned back to look at John, as Alma's skin began wrapping itself around his torso until it tightened and formed a weird skin sweater around him. John started to gag, and I looked away as I felt the urge to vomit. John began freaking out, and I looked back to see him attempting to peel the skin sweater off his body. Every time he pulled part of it off, it began to bleed, until his hands and legs were covered in blood. He started to cry, scratching at Alma's skin as he tried desperately to peel it off. It did come off eventually, and John kicked it aside as he ran into the kitchen. I heard the faucet open as he continued crying. Oh God! I turned at the sound of Ben's voice to see small elves walking out of the closet. They were dressed in typical green outfits, but they were severely deformed, with different-sized heads, arms, and legs. We watched as they all headed towards the pile of Alma's skin. They began to pick it up as she tore off pieces of it with their teeth and ate it until it was all gone. Then, they got on the floor and licked up all the blood before returning back into the closet. There's only 5 minutes left until midnight, Ben said, breaking the silence. Do you think it's over then? I asked. No, Mel replied. I looked over to see that she was pointing at the closet. I could hear footsteps coming from inside. Do you feel that? John asked. I turned, not noticing that he had come back from the kitchen. We stood still as I began to notice that the house was getting cold, continued to drop in temperature, until my teeth were chattering. The footsteps continued even though nothing appeared. I rubbed my arms as I tried to warm up, and began to notice a thin layer of ice appearing on every item in the house. For the next few minutes, the house continued to grow colder and colder, until I was sure that we were going to die. I could feel my heartbeat slow down as my fingers turned blue. My eyes had started to burn from the cold, and I could no longer move. Then, just when I thought it was all over, it was gone, and the house warmed up in the blink of an eye. Is it over? I asked. Yeah, it's midnight. Ben replied. Where's Alma? John asked. I carefully walked over to the closer, peering inside. It was empty. There was no sign of Alma anywhere. What the fuck happened? I asked. I don't know. John replied. This has never happened before. Ben said. She's dead. There's nothing we can do about it. Mel replied curtly. She began to gather her stuff, and we watched as she threw open the front door and left, slamming the door shut behind her. What do we tell her parents? John asked. I don't know. I shrugged. I should get going too, Ben said suddenly. I could tell that he was about to cry, and I stepped out of his way as he left the house. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes, and I excused myself as I ran upstairs and shut the bathroom door behind me. I splashed cold water on my face as I tried to make sense of what had happened. I wondered why this time had been different. As I racked my brain for reasons, I felt a sudden chill as I noticed it was abnormally cold in the bathroom. I turned around as I heard a car start and stood there, staring at the open bathroom window. My heart began to hammer against my chest as my thoughts ran a million miles a minute. I walked over to the window and glanced down just in time to see Alma's car backing out of the driveway. Confused, I stuck my head out the window and squinted as I tried to make out the driver. As the car turned out into the street, I got a direct view into the driver's seat, where I saw a skin, blistering red Alma drive off down the road. Story number 5. A spy cam in my Christmas tree caught more than just Santa. Last year, on Boxing Day, I found a really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I forgot about it until my wife, my 2 daughters, and I decorated the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and said we'd secretly catch Santa in the act. I had an old costume in the attic and intended to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on Christmas night. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea Daddy repositioned it later so it could actually catch the living room and a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working properly. In the morning, I previewed the footage just long enough to confirm the thing was working. Satisfied, I inserted the micro SD card back into the ornament and slipped in a new battery in anticipation for the big night. Daddy didn't want to disappoint his girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs. Like we do every year, we let our daughters open one gift from Mommy and Daddy before going to bed. The girls, still riding their sugar high, could be heard giggling in their bedrooms from all the way up the stairs. From time to time, my wife and I could hear one of them shush the other, claiming she'd heard hoofs on the roof or bells jingling. Eventually, our kiddos dozed off. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed while I turned off all the lights. I retrieved the costume and tiptoed to the living room, getting ready for my big feature film debut. I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies. I drank the milk. I pet my large stomach and said my HOHOHOs. And I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in full view of the camera. Pretty good acting job, if I do say so myself. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop, forwarded to where Santa showed up, and pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen, frantically waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy the girls were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped out gifts. I spotted a box I had not seen the night before. It was a small and wrapped in a blue foil paper I did not recognize. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, that's gotta be from Mr. Elf," she said, her voice cheerful and bright. I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird thing kids say, but my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "Honey, what elf?" she asked. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me like a bird in a jet propeller. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off. He stood there watching me parading around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man in an elf costume stood perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head off a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breaths. He reached towards the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box he'd left behind. I ripped the bow off of it and tossed the frilly thing away. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, on a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I'd put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the bag. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught, or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. Story number 6. I emailed my son's Christmas list to Santa. I didn't expect to get a response. I want some Hot Wheels, a stuffed iguana, and my 6-year-old son Jeff sat on the bed next to me, thinking. I was typing up my son's Christmas list on my laptop, preparing to email it to Santa. Of course, I was merely going to send it to myself. I didn't trust any of those email addresses claimed to be run by the real Santa, and I wanted to play it safe just in case some creep was trying to use parents' email addresses to stalk their children. Is that it? I asked Jeff. He was always a low-maintenance child and never demanded a whole lot. Jeff nodded. That's all I can think of, he said. I smiled and sent the email before closing my laptop. Now we just need to wait until Christmas morning, I told Jeff. He smiled as he jumped off my bed and ran off to play with his toys. The next morning, while Jeff was at school, I checked my email and was surprised to see a message titled, "Your son's Christmas list," from an address I didn't recognize. I opened it up. "Hi, Christina. I saw your son's Christmas list. And there's no need to buy those Hot Wheels or that stuffed iguana yourself like with last year's gifts. I can send it right to you, and you can give it to him on Christmas. I can also confirm Jeff has been a good boy this year. One of the best I've seen. Signed, Santa Claus. Ho ho ho." I was confused. Who was this? How did they know my name or email? How did they know my son's name for that matter? Or what he wanted? I told myself it was just one of my friends from work playing along. Yeah, that was it. Yesterday, I had chatted with some of my friends over texting about what our kids wanted for Christmas. So one of them had probably just made a new account to add to the fun. I deleted the email and went back to my usual business. Shortly after Christmas break began, I sent Jeff over to a friend's house while I went to the store and bought the toys he had asked for, along with some wrapping paper. After heading home, I checked my email again and noticed a new message from the same mysterious address that had emailed me last time. "Hi, Christina. I saw you went out and bought the gifts that I said I'd bring myself. That's okay. I'll bring my own surprise gift for Jeff instead. See, I've been a little short on elves this season, and I've been looking for new recruits to help me make toys. Jeff is such a good little boy. He'll make a perfect elf. Hope you don't mind me taking him up to the North Pole on Christmas Day. I promise I'll bring him down every now and then to visit. Signed, Santa Claus. Ho ho ho." My heart sank. I hadn't told any of my work friends that I had bought the gifts yet. Something weird was definitely going on. I decided to write a response back, angrily demanding whoever this person was to tell me who they were, why they were stalking me and my son, and informing him to stay the fuck away from us or I would call the police. A few days went by with no response. I felt relieved, thinking the guy had finally got the memo and decided to leave us alone, and I completely forgot about it until Christmas Day. While Jeff was asleep during the night of the 24th, I wrapped up the presents and put them under the tree. As per tradition, the next morning, while I was still in bed, I expected to hear Jeff excitedly shouting from the living room that Santa came. I was surprised to hear absolutely nothing, not a single peep. I checked the clock. It was 8 in the morning. Strange. I'd usually expect Jeff to be up earlier than that, especially since it was the happiest time of year for a child. A few minutes passed, and I quickly became concerned. I decided to go downstairs to Jeff's room and check up on him to see if he was okay. I knocked on his door before cautiously peeking in. He was laying in his bed, the blanket pulled up to his head, and his back facing me. "Jeff?" I asked. He replied with a weird grunting sound. Was he sick? I walked over to him and rubbed his head. "Jeff, get up. Santa came." I stopped when I felt a pair of weird bumps on his head, buried underneath his hair. Jeff then turned his head to me, and I jumped in shock. His ears were pointed and covered in hair. His face was stretched out like a dog's muzzle. He grunted again and stuck one arm out from under the blankets. Instead of a hand on the end, there was a furry brown hoof, like that of a goat. My face turned pale as I stared in shock, unable to speak or move upon seeing my son's current state. At that moment, I heard a knock on the door. I ran upstairs, desperately hoping it was one of my friends from work who could help. I looked through the peephole and noticed an unfamiliar figure standing at the door. He was overweight, with a red jacket and a long white beard. Thankfully, I had locked the door, so the man couldn't come in even if he wanted to. I then remembered the weird emails from this month, so I pulled out my phone and opened up my web browser. There was an email from last night, sent from the mysterious address. I opened it up, and what I saw nearly made me faint. I just stood there reading the message over and over again, trying to process everything as the man at the door continued to knock. Hi, Christina. Since you turned down my request to make Jeff into one of my elves, I decided Jeff would make a good reindeer instead. My current reindeer are getting too old to pull the sleigh, and I need just one more kid to complete my new team. I'll be coming over tomorrow morning to pick him up. Signed, Santa Claus. Ho ho ho. Every year, I play a game of life and death with Santa, and all I want for Christmas this year is to stop playing. They say the average child stops believing in Santa around the age of 8, maybe 8.5, but not me, because I'm not like other kids. You see, I've actually met Santa many times. Now, I know what you're thinking, that's not possible. Santa isn't real. Well, you're both right and wrong at the same time, and for that very reason, I stopped telling people the story after I turned 10. But it goes something like this. I remember loving Christmas. The lights, the sounds, the decorations, the stockings, and most of all, like any young child, waiting for Santa to come down the chimney to give me my presents. One Christmas Eve, when I was 4 years old, I remember insisting to my mom that we leave just the right amount of cookies on the table for him. For some reason, my 4-year-old self had decided that he only liked the oatmeal ones, and not those made with chocolate chips, like we actually had in the kitchen. So, my mom and I cooked up a batch just to leave for him. A batch that she helped me bake with love, knowing they would go to waste. That night, I remember putting myself to bed extra early, knowing that the faster I went to sleep, the faster I would wake up in the morning, to the presents that always awaited me on Christmas morning. I had been fast asleep that night, when I was suddenly awoken by the sound of rustling on the roof above me. This was it. I thought to myself, it's Santa. I'll finally catch him in the act. So I snuck out of bed, tiptoed downstairs, and, as expected, spotted a man with a white beard, all dressed in red, standing in the living room by the Christmas tree. I ran to my parents' bedroom in excitement and tugged at their sheets. Mommy, Daddy, Santa's here. Santa's here. My dad rolled over, eyes still closed, and humored me. Oh yeah, he just came down the chimney. That's nice. Now go to bed. Bobby, my mom added, before they both returned to their slumbers. I did as she said, and went back to my room. But as soon as I heard my dad begin snoring again, I carefully made my way back down to the living room to catch another glimpse of Santa. I peeked my head around the corner, and there he was. It's really him. It's really Santa. I kept staring at him, not wanting to miss a moment of his visit. When he finally noticed me, he seemed puzzled for a moment, before he waved me over. Hi, Sant Dash. I began to excitedly call him by name, but he quickly placed one finger over his mouth. Shoo, Bobby, he whispered, before picking up one of the cookies we had left on a plate for him, dipping it in the glass of milk beside it, and taking a bite. Eventually, he reached into a large, green velvet bag, which was filled to the brim with packages, and removed one. He then proceeded to place the wrapped box on a rocking chair beside him, and patted the seat, gesturing for me to join him. Who was I to disobey Santa? I thought to myself, as I ran over to the chair, picked up the package, hopped onto the seat, and opened the gift in a scurry. I muttered as I unwrapped it and removed it from its packaging. It was a humble wooden box with a surface like a chessboard, containing several small pieces, each resembling festive objects like a reindeer, a candy cane, a snowman, and a Christmas tree. It's a game, Santa said with a smile, before explaining the rules. Reindeer beats candy cane beats snowman, snowman beats the Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree beats reindeer. We played the game for hours, and as the night went on, I gradually learned how to play. That first year, he let me win. I know that for sure. After the third game that night, he smiled and told me I was good at the game. He then tipped his red cap, stood up, and let himself out the front door. As soon as my parents woke up the next morning, I rushed to tell them everything that had happened, but they laughed off my story, likely dismissing it as a child's fantasy, and we went about our Christmas Day traditions, just as we always had. Looking back on it, from a kid's perspective, there was nothing unusual about it at all. I was just playing a game with Santa, and so I couldn't have been more excited when he returned a year later. With the same game, we played it again, and I won again, which Santa seemed to be impressed by, laughing aloud as he scarfed down his cookies. It wasn't until the third year where things changed. That year, I was once again excited to play the now annual game with Santa, and just as he always did, he reached into his bag, but this time, he pulled out a different game, not unlike the first, but this board was larger, with more pieces, and far more complex. Okay, Bobby, now that you're old enough, we're going to play for real. I wasn't sure what he was getting at, but I agreed to play anyway. He explained the new rules, which were a bit more difficult to follow, and we began to play, and this time, Santa won, letting out a soft chuckle. He removed 2 items from his pocket, a piece of charcoal and a scroll. He then unrolled the paper, revealing the words, "Naughty List." Below them was a list of names. He then proceeded to take the piece of charcoal and scratch it across the first name on the list, until it was completely crossed out, and then he simply left, just as he always did, through the front door. Truth be told, I didn't think much of it at the time, or the next year, or the one after that. And every year that he won, he would do as he always did, and scratch a name off the naughty list. Now, around this time, it just so happened that in my town, there came to be known something that the locals referred to as the Christmas murders. For 3 years in a row, 3 people had died on Christmas. We all knew their names well: Daniel Jones, Sarah Anderson, and Michael Taylor. By now, I was just old enough to be suspicious of the correlation. So the next year when Santa came around again, I paid careful attention to the first name on the list and memorized it before Santa crossed it out, David Miller. And sure enough, the next day, the headline of our newspaper read, "Christmas Slayer Strikes Again. This year, David Miller." That's when I realized that every time I lost the game to Santa, an innocent person died. That's when I realized that this was not Santa. This was someone else. After that, I stopped looking forward to his visit. I tried everything, locking myself in my room, hiding in the attic, even running outside. But every year, Santa found me. Every year we played the game, and every year that I lost, someone died. But last year was different. Last year, I refused to play the game. "But you have to, Bobby," Santa insisted. "Or what?" I shot back. "Well, let's see who's on the list this year," he said, as he removed the paper from his pocket, unrolled it, and lowered his glasses. "Ah, yes, just as I thought." He pointed to the first name on the list. It was mine. "I don't want to," I cried out, as I began to walk away. "If you don't play, then you get scratched off the naughty list, Bobby. And what do you think happens then? Who the fuck are you?" I shouted. "I want to know. Now." He belted out a laugh, just as Santa always did, in all of those children's Christmas stories and movies, with his eyes closed and holding his belly, seemingly charmed by my reaction. "You know me, Bobby. I'm Santa. Get the fuck out. I'm calling the cops. Then you forfeit," he said, menacingly, as he removed the piece of coal from his pocket and was about to scratch off my name. "Wait," I called out, as I stopped at the door and turned back to him. "All right, fine," I said, defeated, agreeing to play the game. And so, sitting there, across from Santa, and looking down at the wooden pieces, I began to think about everything he had ever taught me about the game. Starting at the beginning, reindeer beats candy cane. Candy cane beats snowman. Snowman beats the Christmas tree. And the Christmas tree beats reindeer. But he was good at the game. Too good. And nearly lured me into a false move. But this year, I was playing more carefully. I thought about every possible move, what his maneuver might be in return, and how I could counter. Somehow, I got the feeling that I was about to make the exact move that Santa wanted me to make. But I was resilient. No matter what, this year, I had to win, and so I did. Christmas tree beats reindeer, I said defiantly as I moved my Christmas tree piece forward, knocking his reindeer to the board. Good job, Bobby. Santa congratulated me with a smile before standing up and walking away. Maybe next year, I won't go so easy on you, he said, before walking out the door, just as he always had. That was last Christmas. Coincidentally, the first year our town didn't see a Christmas murder, and since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Who is he? Why does he make me play the game? Is he doing this to anyone else? And will it ever stop? To this day, I still don't know the answers, but what I do know is Christmas is now just 7 days away, and all I want for Christmas this year is to stop playing the game. Don't look outside on Christmas Eve. My hands are trembling as I write this. I'm hiding in my towel closet. I called the cops, but I don't think they'll be here in time. I mean, who takes calls on Christmas Eve seriously? They probably think I'm some teenager prank calling them since I have nothing better to do than take away time from someone's Christmas. Who would believe what I'm about to say anyway? Let me back things up and set the scene for you. I live alone, 2 states away from my family. I feel terrible for not being able to visit them this year. I've been having financial struggles as of recent. Paying off student loans is no joke. This is the first time I've been able to live on my own. I'm renting a cabin in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, Wisconsin. All that's around is a convenience store and a bar. The place is nice and the rent is cheap. So who am I to complain? 1 bed, 1 bath, and a cramped kitchen that's right behind the living room. The living room has a nice fireplace too. Keeps the house warm through the night. So, now that you've got the picture, I need to share my experience, no matter how few people see it. I didn't have big plans for the holidays. Stay at home, watch some TV, and eat a frozen pizza if I was lucky. No big, fancy dinner, no visitors, just an average night. That's just what happened. I kicked back on the couch with pizza in hand and watched Christmas movies until my eyes grew heavy. I was awakened by a knock at my door at around 11:45. It's dark and snowy out, per usual this time of year. I don't get visitors, nor could I see who it was, so I looked out of the small window in the living room. Frost cloaked the glass, making it a challenge to see who was waiting for my answer. I could make out a human-like figure. My gut was telling me to stay the hell away from what was at my door before I even got a chance to move. The snow was falling so heavily that it was hard to see anything beyond 6 feet of my house. I trusted my gut though, and moved to my room. I began to think I was a bad person for leaving whoever was out there in that icy mess. Just as the thought entered my mind, the knocking grew louder. I covered my ears in response to the noise beyond my door. I faced away and it only got worse. Bang, bang, bang. I was right to trust my gut. Bang, bang, bang. I shouldn't open the door. Bang, bang, bang. I can't let this go on. I exhaled deeply and threw my legs over the bed and reluctantly shuffled over to my door. I twisted the knob and peeked outside. The cold weather nipped at my face as a reply. Hello. I peered through the crack. Hi. The person started. I began to make out facial characteristics and realized it was a young woman. My car broke down, and this seemed like a good place to seek shelter. That was a red flag to me. There's a convenience store and a bar within a mile of each other. Why show up to a random house for help? Now, I consider myself a nice guy, but the holidays don't make me a giving person. I don't like my sleep being interrupted either. I started. I wasn't sure how to respond. Her behavior was off, to say the least. She was glancing over her shoulder, as if she could see anything through the darkness and snow. I can give you a number for a towing company. There should be an inn at least a few miles from here. The towing company can take you. She didn't seem satisfied. Are you sure? She inquired. It's awfully cold out here, and I don't know how long it will take them to get here. She began to look more paranoid. Her eyes darted from side to side, up and down. It was really freaking me out. Listen, Han. My house is a wreck and it's the middle of the night. I'm sorry. I know it's the holidays, but I have a thing about letting strangers into my house. I immediately regretted saying those words. Her fear turned to anger. At this point, she became hysterical. She kicked, punched, and beat my door, trying to force herself in. Her polite words were now screams. Let me in. Let me in. The Jane Doe at my door pounded harder and harder. It seemed like my door was about to break. What the hell are you supposed to do in this situation? So, in the spur of the moment, I just locked the door. The knob rattled violently, then stopped abruptly. I picked up my phone and alerted authorities that there was a manic woman outside of my house. At this point, I figured she had given up and left. I sat down in front of the TV and tried to enjoy the rest of the night. I pondered why she was so upset. No family? Trauma? None of my theories added up. Just as my thinking had concluded and I began to relax, I heard a faint sound. A sound that was so quiet, but seemed so loud. It was the shuffling of snow outside of my window. I pulled my blinds back and peeked outside. The dim light from the street lamps shone onto my white lawn. The woman was making a circle in the snow. I squinted, trying not to reveal my presence. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness outside. It was now 1 a.m. There were symbols I couldn't recognize and a large pentagram in the center. When she finished her artwork, she looked right at me. She was staring into my soul. Her gaze sent chills down my spine. Her mouth opened at inhuman angles. Just then, a scream was released. I fell back into the couch. What the fuck do I do? I called the cops for a second time. Writing this, I'll be censoring my address for my own security. Here's how that phone call went. Address. I need police. Please, come quick. Sir, we already have the sheriff and backup on their way. They should be there within the hour. Lock your doors. I heard a click on the other end. Well, what am I supposed to do now? I'm alone in this house, which seems much more ominous than the night before. There's some psycho lady standing in my yard in the middle of the night. To top it off, the cops that should be arresting this woman are probably out for drinks. I let out an audible sigh and sat on the floor with my back to the couch. This was not what I thought of as an ideal Christmas. I figured I might as well freshen up and get ready for bed. Any sliver of hope left in me was gone. I picked myself up off the floor and made my way to the bathroom. I didn't want to risk her seeing me, so I just used the dim flashlight on my phone. I brushed my teeth and rinsed my face. I thought that would make me feel better, more alert. I was wrong. Once I had finished, I heard a knock at the door, followed by a scream. It was deep, unlike the shrieks previously heard from the girl. Something in me clicked. I mustered the strength to peek outside. There were blue and red lights flashing, signaling help had arrived. But something was wrong. The lights from the car further illuminated my lawn. There were 2 mangled bodies left inside of what I can only describe as the altar. Remnants of black uniforms informed me of who they were. Police. Another guttural howl was heard, this time only a few feet away from my window. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to hide. That brings me to the now. I'm in my towel closet. There are 2 dead bodies in the snow and something outside of my house. Something. Not human. I don't know when she, or it, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, will get inside. But my gut is saying that she will. I couldn't have picked a worse spot to hide. I feel like the idiot friend in a horror movie that gets plucked off first. Please, if you're reading this, protect yourself this holiday season. Don't let it know you're there. Don't be like me. Please, save yourself and your family. I just heard something come down the chimney, and it's not Santa. She's inside.